Welcome, everybody, to Last City Church on this Sunday, June 7th. We're excited to be here, and we're excited to dive into some important topics. And we'll get into it more, but we have with us Deena McMahon, a wonderful member of our community, also a professional counselor and consultant working in the area of trauma and mental health and childhood trauma. She'll talk more about what she's about later, but we're really excited to have her because this is such an important conversation to have, especially now, especially in the world that we have, which is hurting, and especially in the midst of our current times. There's so much pain in the world, and as a community of faith, it's part of our job to be present with and reacting to and helping to heal the pain around us. So we're just so thankful for you, Deena, joining us. Evan's going to begin with worship. Let's all begin by asking the Lord to be present even in our strange virtual format. God, be with us. God, be in our singing and our saying. God, be in our words and actions and deeds, and our hearts be uniting us even though we're apart. God, we just ask that you would be in this worship service this morning, present, powerful, and pushing us to do something amazing in your good world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Evan, lead us in some worship if you would, please.
I would.
Soul is weak, and it seems I can't traverse the trail before me. I survey the glory of your agony, and I find the will to fight for what's before me. 'Cause you ran the race, enduring for your glory. I fix my eyes on you, the founder and the finisher of our faith. I fix my eyes on you, the solace in your suffering is my strength. I fight to follow, you're my righteous guide, and you train me to delight in all that's holy. You're my broken body, you're my crooked stride. Throw off every weight and sin that clings so closely. I will run the race, enduring for your glory. I fix my eyes on you, the founder and the finisher of our faith. I fix my eyes on you, solace in your suffering is my strength. I fix my eyes on you, the founder and the finisher of our faith. I fix my eyes on you, the solace in your suffering is my strength. finisher of our faith. I fix my eyes on you. The solace in your suffering is my strength. From seed to sequoia, I know, though the winter is long, even richer the harvest it brings. Though my waiting prolongs, even greater your promise for us like a seed. I believe in my season to come. Lord, I think of your love like the low winter sun. As I gaze, I am blinded in the light of your brightness, like a fire to the snow. I'm renewed by your melt the ice of this wild soul till the barren is beautiful. I know, though the winter is long, even richer the harvest it brings. Though my waiting prolongs, even greater you promise for me like a seed. I believe that my season will come. Yes, I can see the promise, I can see the future. You're the God of seasons, I'm just in the winter. If all I know of patience, of my patience, then if you're not done working, God, I'm not done waiting. You can see my promise, even in the winter, 'cause you're the God of greatness, even in a manger. For all I know of seasons is that you take your time. Could have saved us in a second, instead you sent a child. Though the winter is long, even richer the harvest it brings. Though my waiting prolongs, even greater your promise for me like a seed. I believe that our season will come. And though the winter is long, even richer the harvest it brings. Though my waiting prolongs, even greater your promise for us like a seed. I believe that our season will come. When I finally see my tree like a seed you were sown for the sake of us all. From Bethlehem's soil grew Calvary's sequoia. Would you pray with me? Father, we thank you for your compassion for all creation. God, we know that your plan is for healing, but we recognize that your timing is not our timing. And God, we also recognize that we have a part to play in that plan. So God, even though this summer that we're in feels more like a winter, even though it's a strange season that doesn't seem to give us much light, God, I pray that the seeds that are planted in this time would be nurtured by us through you, and that they would grow into something better that can be part of your plan. God, we love you so much. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Evan. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Well, Deena, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
So we on the leadership team at Last City have been talking about how to bring mental health stuff to the center of our conversation for quite some time. And, you know, the series we've been doing, talking about called Brick by Brick, the whole idea has been to be really practical about how do we push towards a world, you know, that, you know, the idea is that God is going to someday come back and he's going to recreate and fix this world. And that somehow it's our job now to be building towards that day and to be pointing to that future. And how do we really practically do that? And we've talked about how do we really practically like be in God's presence, because one of the hallmarks of God's future is that God will be present with us. So how do we practice that presence? We've talked about how do we push towards justice issues concerning, we had a whole one concerning incarceration and the injustice around mass incarceration. How do we push towards a world where people are going to be free? So we've been talking about these various issues, and of course, these last couple of weeks have been so difficult for everyone, really. But what a trauma-filled month 2020 we've had. 2020 just needs to take a rest. Somebody get 2020 a drink, chill out. It's been really, really difficult. One of the defining parts of Revelation 21, which is sort of the key verse here, it's this vision of God returning to the world, is this part where it says, there'll be no more tears or mourning or crying or pain. Or in some translations, there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. The old order of things has passed away. And I absolutely hang my hat on that verse every day of my life, that someday God is going to come and wipe away pain and suffering from our world. What a beautiful idea. But of course, we don't live there. We don't live in that world where there's no more tears or mourning or crying or pain. We live in a world where there's all kinds of pain, all kinds of mourning and crying. And part of, I think, the Christian vocation is starting to build towards that day when pain is put back together, when we're entering into people's pain and helping them heal and become and flourish in spite of the pain and move forward and helping repair some of that hurt. And that's why I think it's so incredible that you're able to join us, because your work has been specifically around dealing with people in absolute trauma and children and And the kind of goal today is to talk about what does it look like to deal with trauma as a faith community, and to help people who are in trauma, and to build a place where trauma can be repaired and restored, and start building those really practical bricks. So that's sort of the 1,000-foot view. What I was hoping, Deena, is maybe you just start us off by telling us a little bit more in detail about what you do, the work you've been doing for the last 35 years, and how you go about it.
Well, my job is, I invented my job. So, there wasn't one you could apply for. It just evolved over the years. And I do a lot of mental health with families and children in the areas of, I started out in foster care, and then the cases got worse and worse, and children couldn't return home because the families were so unsafe. Mm-hmm. I worked with children who were murdered, who witnessed people murdered, who were, quite frankly, tortured, just the worst of the worst. And in that work, I had to learn how not to be traumatized every single day by the stories I heard. Growing up with my 3 children and my husband, I can tell you, or family gatherings, nobody wanted to say, "How was your day?" It just was like, it's so dark that to learn to not let it sink you in a cement. Wow. It is really the challenge. So I try to frame my work as making a difference. Even if it's 1 child a day, maybe it's 2 children a week, maybe it's a grandma, grandpa at the end of the month who get custody of the children or who have housing. So I do a lot of expert testimony and forensic work for deep-end child protection cases, adoption cases. And then I do a lot of training around the country, building trauma-informed school systems. I've worked with police departments who are interested in trauma recovery for themselves. And community leaders I've worked with, social service agencies, mental health providers. So that's a bit of what I do.
Awesome. So great segue. The idea of being trauma informed seems like a little bit of a hype buzzword. I think maybe ministry is always a little late to the punch, but just recently in the last, few years, that has been going around Christian circles talking about trauma-informed activism or trauma-informed theology, trauma-informed ministry. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, when you say trauma-informed, what does that mean? Like, describe trauma-informed to us.
Well, trauma-informed is a buzzword now, and it's understanding that we interface with people who have experienced, a great deal of adversity, whether it's from their childhood, their relationships, their poverty, systemic racism, discrimination. People are triggered and traumatized by all kinds of things in their life, and almost all of that is invisible.
Right.
We see maybe a veteran of a war in a wheelchair with his legs missing or her arms missing, and we immediately know, wow, trauma there. But there are so many people in wheelchairs, figuratively, that we absolutely miss, and we interface with those individuals as if they are whole, expecting them to be able to walk and talk and think like a typical person would be. And then we might say something inadvertently that trigger an experience, and they react to us in a way that we think, what's their problem? Oh my gosh, all I said was, how are your kids? Not realizing you just had one die 2 weeks ago. So trauma-informed is understanding that. And now what we really want to do is go the next step and be trauma competent. Knowing about it, reading about it, talking about it is helpful, but it's just not enough. We have to know how to interact with that. What does that mean we say or don't say?
Sure. How
does that inform our decisions and our behaviors?
Sure. So by the way, everyone, for all of you guys who are watching out there, Deena has asked, she said, I love to interact with people and I want to take live questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and comment them on the Facebook page and we'll slide them over put them up on the screen if you have a question you want to ask, and Deena will address it. So if you want to interact, this is a great time to do it, and we'll try to do that. It's not just sort of a one-way conversation. The idea is that we can all actually be gathered in a real conversation around that. And that's something Dana's asked for that she's super comfortable with. So one of my questions talking about being trauma competent, trauma informed, moving from just information to competency is there's so many different kinds of trauma. I was just thinking about this morning, like you said, we interact with all these people and we interact with them as their whole, and they could have gone through any number of kinds of trauma. Do we have to become experts at every kind of trauma? Is there some like baseline things that we know about trauma? Like, so if I was thinking about this, we want to become a community for someone who has been, grown up in an abusive relationship, or we want to be a community that's a safe place for somebody who grew up in a war zone, or somebody who has experienced lifelong racial discrimination and has, those are wildly different kinds of trauma. Do we have to become experts in all of those kinds of trauma in order to create a community that is able to be a safe place for that? What do we do with that?
Not at all. And that sort of goes back to the old school thinking of, unless you're a recovering addict, you really can't work successfully with addicts. Unless you're a survivor of sexual abuse, you really can't work with the victims of sexual abuse. And that's just not true. The thing to work with any individual, intentionally or not, whether we just interface with them in a daily manner, the best thing we can do is to not be afraid and not to be uncomfortable with whatever we might get as a response from them, and to not judge them if they snap at us. So when we say, for example, you meet somebody on the street or across the fence and you say, "How are you? How are you?" How often do we mean it? Do we really mean it? Do we look at them? Do we put our dang phone down and stop looking over their shoulder at what's going on behind them and look at them like we give a damn? How are you? And then, listen to the answer. Because whatever trauma is going on, people who have it often are ashamed. They blame themselves. They've spent years minimizing it or pretending it doesn't exist or being told it doesn't matter.
Sure.
And what matters the most is for one other person to look at that individual and say, "How are you?"
So it's just about having like an authentic presence.
Absolutely, to be genuinely emotionally available. Now, in our busy workaday life, that's harder than it sounds. Right? How are you?
Right.
When you are in the presence of somebody who really wants to know, you feel it.
Right.
You want to be with that person.
And we have such a habit of like pre-programming our answers. I know that I have pre-programmed answers, because people ask, "How are you?" and they expect me to give back this answer like, "Oh, I'm great," but I never say that because I don't want to pre-program this happy-go-lucky answer. So instead, I pre-program a sort of ambiguous answer. I'm alive, and then they don't know what to do with that because they're so used to hearing that happy-go-lucky pre-programmed answer. What you're talking about is literally just like authentic relational presence.
Correct. So I'll use for an example, I just met a couple in their late 60s, a Black American couple who are trying to get custody of their granddaughter. And they live in Capitol View apartments right off Marion University. And this woman has learned to be sort of the caricature of the Southern Black woman, laughs, sings, "Yes, Lord. Oh, yes." Just jovial, big, hearty laugh. Right? No matter what she's doing, that's who she portrays. And I listened to her a bit, and then I said, this must be a scary, scary time. And she just started to sob because she's not been given permission to let people know how afraid she is her whole life. She doesn't get to go around and say, "It's scary being Black."
Yeah.
She gets to say, "Oh, I am good and I love the Lord and He's going to take care of me." Well, she believes that, but it isn't enough to get her through.
Right.
So to acknowledge, and it's, I think we used to think, well, if she feels something, we'll say, "How are you feeling?" That isn't good enough. We have to know how they feel.
Sure.
We have to make assumptions. So when I work with traumatized kids, to say, "Well, how did you feel when that happened is a ridiculous question, because we know the answer is you were horrified,
Right.
you were terrified,
Yeah.
you were hopeless, you hurt. And to say those words is like, that must have been terrible. And not to worry about getting it wrong.
Right.
Because if we get it wrong, they'll go, no, no, that's not how I felt. I felt this. It's like, oh, right, I missed that one.
Yeah.
So getting over our own bashfulness or worry, I think would be important too.
Yeah, that's cool. I have so many questions. Okay. Because you're opening up little doorways to me about how we create community, and I'm trying to figure out how to get at all of it. So some of that's just about our own insecurity, right? It's about how do we deal with our own insecurities in the midst of somebody else's pain,
right?
And because we're insecure of approaching someone else's trauma because we're afraid to ask the wrong questions. We're afraid to re-traumatize them. We're afraid that we're going to not have permission to be in that traumatic space. Right. So, I mean, you're in a situation where people come to you because they're asking for help.
Right.
What advice would you give us who are in the church where we don't necessarily have that permission to begin with? How do we earn that permission to say, hey, can I be here to ask you about your trauma?
And that's tricky, Noah, because as you know, people with mental health challenges rarely raise their hand and say, wow, I really think I have mental health problems. They've been shamed. They're afraid to ask for help. They've maybe asked for help and gotten bad help, which is worse than no help at all. So there's a tremendous internal barrier for people with mental health. So when we say, how are you? They are conditioned to say fine, because if they say, well, I'm hearing voices, I don't sleep well, I'm an insomniac, I worry so much, I make myself throw up 3 times a day, I can't stand nurturing my own body. They're not going to want to say that because they have already been judged for it.
Sure.
So I think somehow we have to convey, I don't want to be an observer of your struggles. I want to be a participant. I'm not a tourist. I'm a native.
Yeah.
So to say, I want to help if you'll let me. I think I know how to help. And even if I don't get it right, at least we're doing it together.
So that's about belonging. It's like saying, I belong to you. You belong to me. We belong here in this space together.
Right.
And you're welcome here. And I want to be with you, and I'm not going anywhere. So
yes.
Consistency and
it's the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is we understand how they feel. Empathy is actually feeling it with them. I mean, when your child hurts, you hurt, right?
Yeah.
That is the nature of empathy.
Yeah.
We don't say, oh, you must hurt without having it. So that's the scary part for us, is that we have to take that on. We hurt too.
Yeah.
Without letting it, at the end of the day, crush us.
Awesome. Okay, so I got some questions coming from the interwebs. Here's one from Laura. Sometimes people have experienced trauma that they may not codify as trauma, so they respond to a trigger in a way that they aren't expecting. How can we help support someone through difficult conversation like that and help them process through an unexpected reaction?
I think we just be very genuine and go, wow, I don't think we saw that coming, did we? That, I wonder if you've ever talked about it before. Thank you so much for telling me. And you know what? I get why you just snapped. I would have snapped, holy crap. And then you must be ready to take this on, or that wouldn't have just bubbled to the surface. And that's very hopeful, and that's very encouraging. Thanks for trusting me enough to be bitchy. And let me know that, because that's cool. And to celebrate the moment by reframing it as a step towards healing.
Sure. That's awesome. Celebrate the moment and reframe it by a step towards healing.
You bet.
So we were talking earlier about how trauma is often downplayed, and we downplay just with our kind of programmed interactions. What are some of the other ways you think that, like a community like our church, I mean, you know our church, you've been a member of our church for quite some time. What are some of the ways we downplay people's trauma, or aside from these programmed interactions that we kind of talked about, is there ways that corporately we downplay or don't acknowledge these traumas?
Yeah, and I, it's not just the church, it's society as a whole that does this. COVID, for example. How many people have we heard say, oh, this is not the first one. We've been through polio and the flu and blah, 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 which really minimizes the impact of what we're experiencing.
Right.
The plague, I get the plague was bad, but we weren't alive at the plague, and most of the people who are talking about COVID weren't either. So I think we normalize it and say, oh, we'll get through this without, how are we going to get through this? I think we blame people. Well, if they didn't live in inner city Chicago, and if they would have gone to college or sent their kid, blah, blah, blah. So we blame them for some of the trauma that they've experienced or we gloss over it and quickly get to you just have to have more faith. Yeah. Which is the ultimate shaming, right?
Yeah, right. Shame. Ooh, shame is a tool of the devil. That's what's up. Yeah. Wow. I think that's super right on. And, that's so prevalent in the murder of George Floyd, in the racialized violence that's going on in our city right now. I mean, Deena lives not too far away from me. And, the last week has been a really tense time in our city. The National Guard is, driving Bradley fighting vehicles down the street. It's a really, really insane and intense time. And this sort of leads into the question we got from Laura, and I want to tie this in, is that she says, some of my white family members and friends are having unexpected reactions to what is going on in our country and reassessing their beliefs about racial differences. How do we balance supporting them through those feelings, educating the right way in the right time? I'll let that question stand on its own, but I have some kind of similar related questions. So maybe you take a crack at that, and then
That's a big question. Yeah. How would I know, Laura? That's a really great thing. And I know that families that have never really talked about race relations or discrimination are talking about it now. The book, White Fragility, Why White People Have Such a Difficult Time Talking About Race. It comes from our own, and I'm not going to use the word white privilege because I really dislike that phrase, because I think it comes from a place of guilt and shame. But to understand that we have such different backgrounds, and many of our elders or family systems have never interfaced with people that aren't white. They have no practice or no practical skills or knowledge. And so when they're confronted with some of these things going on, they're in kindergarten. So how do we teach kindergartners to read? You start out with phonics, right? You start at the beginning. And we don't throw a lot of jargon at them about what should be, or the world's wrong, or it's broken, because they help build this world. And they have to have ownership and pride in that also. So I think it's really knowing where they're at and being patient enough to say, oh yeah, ask me anything you want, and I'll try to be okay with that, and really being okay with it, not rolling our eyes. So like my kids are in their 20s, late 20s, mid 20s, and if they hear something stupid out of my mouth about race relationships, they're all over me. It would be more helpful if they go, Mom, here's another way to think about that. It's like, oh, thank you, because when they're not jumping down my throat, I can hear it better. So I think people are afraid, Laura, of saying that they don't know, or they're afraid of asking because they're afraid of the repercussions. And you've heard, and we've all heard a lot of that on the radio, the anger of why don't you know more? Yeah. But that's not helpful.
Right. And so, I mean, my experience with this is that people are in so many different places in process, and we all want everybody to be at the end of the process, or where we kind of feel like, we always feel like we're at the end, like, hey, I've arrived, right? Yep. And of course that's ridiculous, because none of us has, and we all have to know that as part of our life is opening ourselves up to being in process all the time with everything, and right. That it means figuring out what it means to live in a racialized world, figuring out what it means to live in my white racialized body. We need to be open to being in process about our faith, what we think God is. Our worldview is always in process.
Yep.
And we expect people to arrive where we're at, but we don't give them the benefit of the years of process that maybe we have had to go through to get to this place. You know, my friends from college don't recognize the words coming out of my mouth. In fact, I've had people say that to me online this week because of some of the things I've said in public. They're like, "You've come a long way." Well, yeah, I hope so. You know, that was a long time ago. And so I think one of the ways that we as a community downplay trauma and don't support doing this well is we don't make places for people to honestly be in process and say, "Hey, I think this, is that right?" You know, and without shame, have that conversation and be able to, you know, take another step, whatever direction it is, and be comfortable with it. It's not our job to own their process. It's our job to just be in relationship with them while they're processing, you know?
Right. That is so true. And I think that fear of shame and getting it wrong really holds people in fear.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no growth when there's fear. I mean, unaddressed fear is the biggest barrier to new learning that exists. And so until we make people feel safe for getting it wrong, there has to be physical safety, certainly for our brothers and sisters in the world, but there has to be emotional safety if we're really going to think about being a trauma-confident community.
Sure.
That means safe enough to be stupid. Safe enough to
safety. Safe enough to be stupid. We should put that on. Safe enough to be stupid. Love
That's
it.
exactly. And then safe enough to apologize and know you're going to be forgiven and go like, oh, instead of having that held against you, right? People with long memories for being offended. It's like, you know, we really need to live that sort of, we wear it out there and be obvious about it. Yeah, I was stupid, you know, but get over it.
Say it's so hard to do because when people be stupid in your presence, you just want to be like, dude, I'm going to roast you. You don't even know. But that's not gracious. You know, it's very hard to do. Okay, so here's a great question from Nate, and then we got another question from Jay, and I'm sure you have to do this, so I'm really interested to hear your response. How do we separate these kind of conversations from politics? Words like triggered and privileged have become almost politicized. When talking about institutional trauma, people often start to fall into politics. These walls seem like a barrier to good conversations, and I don't know how to sidestep it. I'm sure you have to deal with this. You know, you're talking about real people's trauma in your counseling sessions, and it gets immediately politicized, nationalized. How do you step it?
Yes, it does. Well, there isn't a political party that exists that has not discriminated against people.
Come on.
You know, there is no perfect.
Or a religious institution. Or
that's exactly right. I mean, I don't know of a religious institution per se that's gotten it right, that has truly lived the values that they espouse. That is true for political parties, and that is true for everyone. So I think, you know, racism and politics go so hand in hand. It's like, well, there's white privilege. There's all kinds of privilege. You know, there's all kinds of, there's health. People who are healthy. Are they privileged because they're healthy? You know, am I privileged because I'm white? Am I privileged because I haven't been homeless? Am I privileged because I vote one party or the other? And I think we just have to say, this is not a conversation about politics right now, because we're not here to talk about who you vote for. We're here to talk about how you heal and how we help other people heal no matter who they vote for. And I really want to separate that line, because as soon as you open it to a political discussion, the anger surfaces.
Sure.
And anger really doesn't have a place in the healing process. I get that there's justifiable anger, and we need to express
that. Anger doesn't have a place in the healing process. No. That is a wildly important. Yes. Okay. Continue. I just need to process.
No. That's just never come out of my mouth before. But I know when I say it, I know it's true, because you can't be an angry healer, and you can't. You can't. And people who have been traumatized are angry, but they don't even know it because they're in so much pain, or they're in so much pain that they pretend they're angry. Or that's what they express because it's safer to be angry than suffering. Yeah. And so to know that at the bottom of all anger is really pain,
right,
and grief and loss, and to dive right through the anger, like right through the needle in the haystack. I hear your anger and I know what you're doing. is you're telling me that you're in pain.
Right.
The political process has caused a lot of pain.
Right. And part of that is, or maybe most of that is, even giving people space to be angry and be angry honestly, because, we're all going to be angry, and say it's okay for you to be angry. And I know that that's not you lashing out at me. That is you being angry because you're in so much pain, and I empathize with your pain.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And I get it. And it's not your fault you feel that angry. And anger, staying angry is going to prevent you from healing.
Right.
And you have a choice to make. And I'd like to help you be that person that can help you walk that.
All of that is predicated on like a deeply relational foundation. You have to have like some real guts in your relationship in order to do that.
Absolutely. And there is a controversy, if you will, in my field about you really can't be therapeutic or helpful until you have established a good rapport. And I know therapists that say, oh, after 6 months, they're still establishing a rapport. I think you can establish rapport in 10 minutes. I think you don't have to have a lifelong relationship to have a meaningful relationship. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, we're not involved long-term in a person's life, but we can be an effective healer and companion even in short periods of time.
Because who does that with us, like not in a counseling thing, but like in a relational way. We've all met people who are like sort of ferociously relational, or you're with them for 10 minutes and they kind of blow your mind because they're like so present with you. They're so legitimately interested in you. They're so good at listening and hearing your pain. And you're like, you come away from those people like, oh, I got some time with this person and they changed me, Right.
And those people probably either innately knew or read a lot of good books about neuroscience, because how our brain develops is every second we have millions of neural synapses coming together for pain or pleasure, right? Mm-hmm. And the ones that make us feel good or the ones that make us don't feel good, those are always remembered somatically in our body. So when we're with somebody who makes us zing in our brain, we're going, our brain neurologically is going, this feels great.
Good, yes.
And we're drawn to more of that.
Yeah.
And so that's just naturally how our brain works. We are attracted to that. It should be.
Yep. Okay. So now that you've got into biology here with the somatic response, Jay's asking, having worked with families of children who have faced incredibly difficult situations, how does generational trauma come into play, and how can we engage in with that to bring healing?
That's a great question. When it's a different question dealing with the children versus the adults. The children aren't aware of generational trauma. Mm-hmm. They just know that they're really unhappy and hungry, and mom's mad and dad's drunk a lot. They don't, they don't get it. They don't care, and we don't want to even think about working with them in that context. Mm-hmm. We just want to alleviate their anxiety. But with the grown-ups, when we're talking about families who, third generation, and nobody in their family's ever had a job, that's generational trauma. And maybe they're white and they live in South Dakota and they grew up on the reservation, or, we think about the Native community or the Black community as generational trauma, but there's lots and lots of people. There are fourth generation incest families. And it's real easy as a therapist and a child therapist to hear a perpetrator talk about what he did to a child. I don't have much stomach for that. But then to put on my therapeutic hat and say, he's a victim too. That people who've experienced generational trauma are doing what they know to do because that is their world. And it's been a small world and a dark world. Right. And so again, we have to go back to, we're not going to judge people who've experienced generational trauma. We're going to acknowledge and affirm, of course, that's the decision you made. Of course you would. It's what other decision could you possibly have made? And there's another way. Yeah. And there's another way. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And boy, one of the most frustrating conversations I've ever had was with this guy who just refused to believe that any person couldn't just decide to stop being in a certain worldview.
Right.
It's like, well, they made the choice to live in poverty. That's the choice they made. They're Americans. Anybody can choose to move out. Like, no, these people they have no other worldview. There's no one's presented them an option in any way to get out of that. How are they supposed to make a way? There's no way.
Right.
So much anger and pain around this. I feel like we have not developed that the grace that we need to be able to see even the worst people and see them as victims of their own circumstance, to look at them and go, these people have suffered. There's not a person on earth who is a horrible person who isn't horrible because they've suffered.
Correct.
Yeah,
right? Babies are not born bad.
Right.
I know they're predisposed, or maybe they're prenatally exposed, and genetically they're put together already, but they're not bad. There's no such thing as a bad kid. We make that, or we fix that.
Right. Okay, so this conversation has gone so fast, and we're almost running out of time. So a couple of things. I just want to show you some love. Maggie says, Deena, you're an incredible genius. I'm sharing this with everyone I know. And Paul says, very helpful insights. Thank you. So in the time that we have left here, Deena, I'm wondering if you would just pitch the big vision for us about, as a church, what can our community do, and be as concrete as you can about the things that we can do to develop a community that is able to be a repairing community, a place where people are restored, a place where people are put back together, where their trauma is acknowledged, and there's space for that trauma-informed, a trauma-competent, a trauma-repairing community. What can we as a church people do to say, I want to be part of this world? These are steps that we need to take. Where do we begin?
Well, our church has some absolutely fabulous examples of how to deal to traumatic events that are life-changing. And when we go back to the crucifixion, what a traumatic experience for those disciples. They were horrified. They couldn't believe it. They locked themselves indoors, in rooms, and stayed there. They were afraid to talk about what they'd seen because they could be killed or arrested. And then they still didn't believe it. And they saw Jesus and went, nah, this can't be you, God, this is really. Yeah. And then they started talking about it and getting excited about it. And imagine how when they started talking about, hey, we see a vision, a new world, there's a last city, people in their communities thought they were nuts. You're a lunatic. That place, like, really, you're talking about some guy was nailed on a tree and he died. And now he's back and he's going to save us. That is like paranoid schizophrenic right there, right? But they did it. They were afraid. We read about the fear. And then they unlocked the door, just like we're doing. And then they went out in their community and started talking to people, one person at a time, 10 people at a time, a crowd at a time. They didn't care about how many people were there when they started talking about their Savior. And our community starts with every one of us. And so our community is only as good or as helpful or as genuine as each one of us decide to be every day. And it's really the collectiveness when we come together with the goodness that we not just intend to have, but really demonstrate and share and offer, that we're going to be that community. And so every day we can say, so instead of saying to someone now, how are you? I say, what have you done for yourself that's good today? Have you done something good for yourself today? Because if we do something good for ourselves, that's naturally going to lead us to do something good for somebody else. Love yourself as your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself, right? So I think we have very concrete scriptural suggestions, recommendations, and directions, actually, about here's what God says we can do to build that last city.
Love it. Love it. What a great place to end. Few announcements just by way of getting the information out. We've got a kids Zoom going on. It should be going on already. Allie started it in the other room. So if you want to get on that, you're welcome to do that. The rest of us are going to get on a Zoom call at 11 o'clock just to check in and say, what have you done good for yourself today? Instead of saying, how are you? That's what we'll say. And all of that is with the intention of building a community that is actually generous and gracious and humble and free, that actually shows up for each other, that really is digging into each other's lives in an authentic enough way that we can show up for anyone who walks through our door. And I just want to say, as a pastor, like what we're talking about, friends, is talking about kind of like writing a blank check, right? We're talking about saying, whoever walks through my door, I'm going to, it doesn't matter who they are. They could be the best or the worst or hurting or put together or whatever. Whoever walks through the door, we are going to love this person well enough that we can be authentically in their life.
And Noah, I want to say one more thing. How would our church, so let's pretend we're all back together, and we will be, and a couple walks in looking pretty scruffy or wearing good, nice clothes, suits, with a big shirt that says, I love Trump.
Ooh. Yeah, what are we going to do?
What would we do with that? And we have to look at our own judgmental selves and say, how are we going to manage that?
Yeah.
Because we have to be and should be and want to be, come on in.
Right. And we don't have to agree with them, but we do have to love them.
Right.
That's a Christian imperative. Like this
Absolutely.
is what we have to do.
Absolutely.
Yep. When the MAGA hats come to our church, like we just have to decide already that we will love them. And and there's no we're so resolute and committed to that that it may even, the scary part is that may be painful for us to do.
Of course.
And we'll have to be aware and competent enough to know that there will be people in our own community that will be traumatized by that. And we're going to have to rally around them and care for them. And there's just no cut and dry about it. It's going to be difficult, messy, real, and important work.
Being trauma competent isn't painless.
Yeah, as you said yourself.
It comes with a price.
Yeah, you spent 30 years trying to hold it together at parties, That's what you said at the beginning. It's difficult. It's hard work. Which, is probably not the best church planning model, but I think that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing as Christians. I think that's our call. And so I want to thank you so much for
thank you
giving us some permission to be bold and to make some mistakes doing this, some permission to be gracious with other people and with ourselves, permission from to press into this and that this is good, important, and real work. Thanks so much for that. Thank
you, Noah. I miss church.
Yeah.
I sure want to have church again.
Yeah, we miss it too.
I know. Love you guys.
Okay. All right, friends, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. We will see you next week.